So I have this prevailing thesis that I believe is proving right every year, which is that Americans are getting lazier and we want people to do it for us. And so our insight was that while everybody has, dabbled on eBay, right? Or I think since Poshmark has been around, dabbled on Poshmark, the stickiness is wanting a little bit because it's work to sell your own stuff, right? We all work every day in our jobs, in our life, and we've got kids and families. And so the idea that we were going to spend our free time photographing clothing, listing it, being our own fulfillment and distribution center, doing customer service, it's just a lot. And so there are millions of people who do that, but we were really trying to target the tens and tens of millions of people who don't.
This is Climate Rising, a podcast from Harvard Business School. I'm your host, Mike Toffel, a professor here at HBS. This episode is part of our Circular Economy series. Today, I'm joined by James Reinhart, CEO of ThredUp, one of the world's largest online resale platforms for secondhand fashion. I'll ask James about how ThredUp's model works, the logistics and business economics behind resale, and what it takes to change consumer behavior and retail partnerships in the fashion industry. We'll also talk about how reuse models can scale and how ThredUp navigates growth while staying mission-driven. And I'll ask him for advice for those looking to work in the circular economy. Here's my conversation with James Reinhart at ThredUp. James, thank you so much for joining us on Climate Rising.
Thanks for having me. Great to be here.
James, why don't we start with a little bit of your background? So you started ThredUp almost 20 or 15 years ago or so?
Yep.
So what were you doing before that?
Yeah, I started the business out of business school. So I was working on the business while trying to get all my casework done. So I didn't get the best grades, my final year of business school because of that. But before that, though, I worked in public education. So I helped start a charter school serving low-income kids. I was a teacher for a few years. I was very focused on the intersection of private and public partnerships, right? And so education was a passion of mine, and I thought the education system in this country could do better. And so I was very much focused on that. And I think there's a through line in my career around, trying to do well and do good at the same time.
Right. So then you were here at Harvard, HBS, and at the Kennedy School, doing a joint degree, right? That 3-year program?
Yep, I was there. I started at the Kennedy School and then did 2 years at the business school.
So you were here and you were drumming up this idea while you were a business school / Kennedy School student.
Yes. Yeah, I mean, because I was a teacher and in education before, that's also a proxy for saying I didn't have any money. And I went to actually sell some of my clothes at a local consignment store on Mass Ave, and they wouldn't take my stuff. They said, "Oh, we don't do men's, we only do luxury, blah, 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 blah." And I thought at the time, well, that doesn't really make any sense. This stuff can't be worth zero. And at the time I was taking a class all about markets and market failures. And I thought, well, this sort of tracks to be a market failure. And that began what has been a long journey.
Yeah. So that's really interesting. It's always amazing to me that people's personal experience can really motivate them to start a business. You hear this over and over again.
Yeah. I remember it vividly. And I remember coming home and talking to, at the time, my fiance, but my wife, being like, this just doesn't make any sense. And she was like, And I was like, this is a big industry, right? We talked about goodwill. This is a big industry and it's just broken. And she's like, And so, and then I went to actually class the next day and some of my friends, I said, hey, what % of the clothes in your closet do you wear? And they're like, what? I was like, yeah, like, what do you wear? Well, how much? I'm like, I don't know, half. I was like, I was like, what are you going to do with the other half? And literally like verbatim, like, I don't know. I probably should give it away. And it was like a series of those little things where I was like, there's something here.
Yeah. Yeah. So what was the answer? Why was there a consignment market for women and not for men?
I mean, I think what became clear, there's a lot of nuance into how big the market is, but also the attractiveness of how do you build a business in the market. What was clear is that women shop more than men, and they value the freshness replacement cycle more than men. And ThredUp, to this day, we just do women's and kids clothing, and we don't do men's. And I get asked pretty much every day when we're going to start men's or why don't we do men's? And I jokingly have the same answer I've been saying for a long time, which is men wear the same four colors: blue, black, brown, and gray. And men tend to wear out our clothes before they're ready for a second life. And so you combine those things, and what you have is not a great market. And so even though our business started with men, it was clear actually women were the answer. And so that was the journey that we were on.
Got it. Super interesting. So we're talking in the midst of a series on circular economy, and the idea that you just described is, there's two off ramps after you're done with clothing. One is, does it have further life in its current form? And the second is, if not, what do you do with the fibers? And we're going to talk to other companies about the fiber piece and the recycling piece, but here we're talking about prolonging the lifespan. So instead of it aging in place in your closet, it's going to age in someone else's closet and hopefully on their body. I mean, that sounds like that's the basic idea.
Yeah, that's exactly right. There's so much time in the life of our clothing where we decide, that shirt's not for me. And I don't know what the stat is anymore, but back when we started the business, it was many years from when a piece of clothing had its last wear on you to when you actually decided to get rid of it. And it was funny. I remember making an infographic around how long this took back then. And then, your clothing moves from your closet into a bag, right? And then it moves from the bag into the garage. Then it moves from the garage into your trunk, right? And all these are moments that it makes its way to, wherever the recycling process might take it. And our thesis was that there are so many better ways for that clothing to be reused. And what we needed to do was make it easy. And this is, I think, the core thesis for ThredUp: make it easy for people to get rid of the things they no longer wear and feel good about that. And that's how we got started.
Got it. So also to create an incentive to actually get rid of it in a way before it gets eaten by moths in your garage.
Yeah. And what you find is it's not necessarily like you're never going to get rich getting rid of your used clothes, right? That is not like the goal. But I think the combination of giving people a sense of agency of, I got rid of my stuff on ThredUp. And then we tell you, hey, Mike, thanks so much for sending stuff in. We were able to resell these items and recycle these items. And I think that connection, because often when you would just donate stuff, there was a little of this, I guess it's just going to go somewhere. And people didn't really know and didn't have any agency there. And so I think for us, it was really about attaching the process of doing something good with, that feels good that that there's somebody else out there wearing that sweatshirt that I grew out of.
Right. So you're providing transparency as to like what its fate is. Now, I imagine when you receive goods, you might be having to sort them into three piles, like the pile of like, yes, let's put this on the market and hopefully it sells. Another pile is like, well, this really can't be, we'll try and sell it, but then it doesn't sell. So you end up donating it. Another pile might be you receive it and you're like, we can't sell this. So you know that right away. And so that either then itself goes into a donation perhaps, or to some sort of fiber recycling or trash. So tell us a little bit about that sorting process that your team engages in.
So we now operate 4 distribution centers around the country. We have one in Pennsylvania, one in Texas, one in Georgia, one in Arizona. And yeah, we're processing hundreds of thousands of pieces of clothing every day. And you're right. I mean, some of the stuff, when we take it out of the bag or the box, it's immediately available for sale. We feel great about it. We know it's going to sell. And some of the stuff, it's unclear. Certainly in the early days as we had less high quality data. I think at this point, we're closing in on, 300 plus million pieces of clothing that we have processed through our facility. So as you can imagine, a lot of data that tells us this item's going to sell at this price. And so we do a lot of optimization there. And then, yeah, unfortunately, we do get stuff we have to, reject or recycle. I think what we've done over the last few years, though, is really educate people on what makes sense for resale and what makes sense for donation and what makes sense for recycling. And I think we pride ourselves on the fact that most of what we're getting is stuff that can be reused as clothing. And, I often remind people that a lot of the stuff we give to Goodwill, as an example, or Salvation Army, a lot of that stuff ends up in a landfill, but not because they're bad people, but there's just so much stuff. And so what we really were focused on is just another mechanism to create opportunity for supply and demand, because Goodwill, as amazing an organization as it is, it's just overwhelmed by us dropping stuff off. And unfortunately, they have to bail it up and some of it ends up in a landfill. So we were really focused on new supply chain. And I think that was the thesis for us at the beginning was, what would it look like to do Goodwill online? And so we built facilities to do that.
Got it. So you've been trying to train customers because it's actually kind of worse for the environment in some sense for them to send it to you and then you having to give it to Goodwill as opposed to them
Absolutely.
going down the block and bringing it to Goodwill themselves. And plus it adds costs to your system to have to sort stuff out.
So we really are trying to get customers to be smarter across all their decisions. And it seems like it's working, actually.
Yeah. So this is essentially a consignment model, right? Like
Right.
that back to that consignment store that you visited. It's the
Yep.
same kind of sense, the same business model. It's just online as opposed to offline.
Yes, exactly. And I think the big difference of online versus offline, just to put a pin in it, is that I think in a physical context, consignment stores are really space constrained. And so they really have to be picky about what they put on the floor because they've got a 1,500 or 2,000 square foot store. And so you can see a lot of them are run, by sole proprietors and, they can't afford to take stuff and put it, back in the stock room, right? They really do need to run these small businesses. We think about ourselves as a much different sort of play, right? We have a national demand curve. And so even if a customer is dropping stuff off or sending us stuff to us from South Carolina, that stuff can be sold nationally. And I think that notion of a national supply and demand curve really does change what can be resold. And that's a big part of what we're trying to do online versus offline.
Yeah. So I imagine when you were drumming up this idea, you had lots of different business models and operating models on your mind. And an alternative that comes to my mind is an eBay or Poshmark kind of model where you're still a two-sided platform, but you're not handling the physical goods yourself. It's going directly from the supplier to the demander. What made you decide to get involved in the physical infrastructure?
So I have this prevailing thesis that I believe is proving right every year, which is that Americans are getting lazier and we want people to do it for us. And so our insight was that while everybody has, dabbled on eBay, right? Or I think since Poshmark has been around, dabbled on Poshmark, the stickiness is wanting a little bit because it's work to sell your own stuff, right? We all work every day in our jobs, in our life, and we've got kids and families. And so the idea that we were going to spend our free time photographing clothing, listing it, being our own fulfillment and distribution center, doing customer service, it's just a lot. And so there are millions of people who do that, but we were really trying to target the tens and tens of millions of people who don't.
Got it. Right. And they have to think about their own pricing as well.
There's so much, right, to deal with and returns, right? It's like, oh, God. And so when we were doing primary research in the beginning, I would ask people, have you sold anything on eBay? In a room of 100 people, you'd get 5, 7, 10 people raise their hand like, oh, yeah, I sell on eBay. And then you'd ask that same room of 100 people, how many of you have donated to Goodwill or similar in the last 18 months? 100 out of 100. And I think that insight was, okay, there's a much bigger TAM out there. If we do the work, all the while acknowledging, man, doing the work is really hard, really expensive, going to take a long time. But that's what we chose to do.
Yeah. I mean, because you're paying the labor, you're paying
it all. It's very hard, right? It's like what we do
warehouses.
It's hard. Yeah.
Yeah. And of course, there's additional postage or UPS involved all along. So let's talk a little bit about the two-sided market. So anytime you have a two-sided market or two-sided platform, you have to figure out it's not valuable to buyers if there's not enough suppliers online. And people aren't going to list supplies online unless there's the perception that there's buyers that are going to be there. So whether this is Uber or whether this is eBay or whether this is ThredUp, you always have this question of how do we invest in trying to attract enough people of both sides? And Uber, their approach was let's go city by city with local density. In your case, maybe that's not so applicable because you're not hiring drivers to take rides around the city. You have a more of a national play. But how did you decide how much emphasis to place on the donors of the goods or the consignees versus those who might be purchasing?
My thesis for a long time, Chris and I as co-founders, was it's all about supply. And so generally speaking, two-sided markets, at least our thesis is that they're all supply constrained at scale, right? I think what constrains Airbnb's growth today is more listings or Uber's growth. Maybe it's different in food for Uber Eats. So we were very focused on supply. And so when the business got started, it was not on consignment. we believed really that you needed to pay people up front, that you really need to build an arbitrage business. Because if you didn't have the supply, it didn't matter. And so I think at the time, consignment was still not something people were used to doing online. Like today, it's funny, people are like, oh yeah, it's online consignment. Back then, that didn't really exist. And so we were focused on building sort of a price arbitrage business between supply and demand. Our operating principle was always, what can we do in the business to make it easier for people to send us stuff? We take a lot of pride on the fact that to this day, we've almost never spent any money acquiring sellers, which is a pretty rare thing, in two-sided markets. And it's because I think we built something that sellers just naturally gravitated to. But I often, I think that our real key innovation was the clean out kit, which is the way people send us stuff, and then the operations to process that. But I always, when I talk to other entrepreneurs or people thinking about marketplaces, I always say hey, what part of the market needs to be subsidized, right, to build liquidity? And for us, it was all about sellers. And, we did all kinds of crazy things. We bought stuff on Craigslist to jumpstart liquidity. We overpaid people. We went to their house to pick stuff up. I mean, we did all things to build and fake having a bigger supply market than we probably did at the time.
Yeah, just goose it so that you have more items for customers to browse through.
Yeah. And it's still true, Mike, today. When we process items online at a higher rate, conversion rate goes up, we attract new buyers. And so even though there's 4.5 million items or something on ThredUp today, we know that the refreshment rate, the amount of fresh listings we're putting online drives buyer satisfaction, drives buyer growth. So I think these things are pretty sticky over time around, how these network effects work.
Yeah. And do a lot of buyers become sellers?
Interestingly enough, the last time I looked at this, it's probably been a year or two. So it was about a third. There's about a third overlap between buyers and sellers, which is about as high as eBay ever really became at its peak. The tricky part for ThredUp is that we want most sellers to be buyers. We don't necessarily want every buyer to be a seller, right? It really depends on the mix of goods in a person's closet, how much they have, and the brands and so forth. So, but yes, in general, we find our best customers, the highest lifetime values come from who are on both sides of the market.
Got it. And on the climate side, so this is a climate podcast, a business and climate podcast. So I'm interested in it because it prolongs the lifespan of goods. It can keep them out of the landfill. But on the other hand, maybe it's fueling more growth. If people feel like, oh, I can buy this item for $100, but then I can sell it for $20, then really my effective layout is only 80. And so it increases my budget to buy more stuff, more new stuff even. So is there I guess we might call that a rebound effect or something like that. Is there any sense that that's what's going on, or is it indeed dominated by the idea of keeping things out of landfills?
I don't know whether it's dominated by that, but I think our data suggests that when people start shopping secondhand, two things happen. One, they don't go backwards. So this is interesting. Once you start shopping secondhand, it's actually pretty hard for you to go back and pay retail again if you're having a positive experience. Really what you just see is an inexorable kind of march to secondhand being a greater share of people's closets. And so that data to me suggests actually that people aren't really thinking about it as I'll buy new and then resell it. It's more that I'm generating great value. I think that's somehow how people get started. And there's always going to be, I think, a segment of customers for whom they want the shiniest new thing and they're willing, right? We love the influence we can have in the organization, but changing American consumption, I think, is a high bar. But I do think this idea that once people get to the rhythm of secondhand shopping, they stay in it, to me suggests if you follow the shape of that curve for 25 years, you're better off. And the thing that we have to keep doing for brands, and hopefully we'll talk about that, is getting them to think about how do they make clothing that does have the ability to stand the test of time. And I think that's the countervailing force to all of this, is if clothing is made to fall apart, then secondhand will have challenges, over the long term.
Yeah, well, let's talk about that. Now seems as good a time as any. I mean, I think the critique of a lot of brands, hot brands especially, many of which are low price, but not necessarily, is that clothing, especially for women, I think I've heard the critique, is worth only a few wears before it starts showing its age and may rip or shed or something. So that is a trend that is maybe a threat toward a reuse model. If in fact old items used to last 100 washes and the new ones last 5 washes and people want to wear things for kind of 5 times, then there's not much of a reuse market, at least in that space. So tell us a little bit about how those trends are affecting you, if at all, and what influence, if you're having any conversations with brands, trying to influence any of that.
I think it's a real issue. Ultra fast fashion companies, the Sheins of the world, and there are others. I think Shein takes a lot of the blame, but there's a lot of fast fashion out in the universe that doesn't necessarily get marketed like that. And they're really bad for the planet. I mean, not only are they bad from a few times consumption, linear kind of throw out model, but they consume a lot of virgin natural resources. And then up until recently, they were shipped overseas through the loophole that the Trump administration closed in April. And so look, I do think they're bad, setting aside even the environmental issue around microplastics and a lot of the data that's come out about that. So what we're trying to do is educate brands that they potentially can build more staying power by building higher quality things. So we're trying to support brands and their resale initiatives. So helping a brand take back the items that they've produced, in many cases resell those items to a segment of customers that might be interested in that, giving them data about what's selling and what's not and what the trends are. But I think a lot of brands acknowledge the quality decline in their products, and we see it every day. And I hate to be like the old guy, but it's like they don't make things like they used to. That is true. And it's not just in apparel, it's in lots of things. But so our approach is if we can just increment progress with brands, I think that's really important.
Yeah. So there are some brands that are actually trying to take on this idea of a reuse market, right? So is that a threat to you, or is that a business line that you're engaging in?
Yeah, I mean, that's a business line for us. We've invented the term resale as a service, RAS, and we work with close to 50 brands at this point. Big brands like J. Crew and Reformation, and really trying to help them figure this out. Because I think brands are really, these days, brands are in the fight of their life, right? It's hard to be a brand retailer these days with all of the competition and the structural forces of labor and logistics. And so we really think about ourselves as a partner to those brands to help them be the experts, help us be the expertise for them. Sometimes I define it as, a brand doesn't need to do everything, right? When a brand opens a store, they don't buy the building, they open a store. And so we think about ourselves as if we can be infrastructure that can help a brand in the resale industry. That's really where we want to play.
Got it. So is this like a fulfilled by Amazon kind of model where you're using your infrastructure, but with a different flow, a different source of it, for example?
Yeah, exactly. Like right now there's about 900 retail stores in America, Athleta, J. Crew, Madewell, Reformate, there's a bunch. And you can go in there and pick up a ThredUp co-branded clean out kit with these brands, and you can send back your stuff through one of our brand partners. And not just the brand stuff, but any stuff. I think the real insight, again, back to the laziness piece, is you got to make it as easy as possible for people to get rid of things. The magic of it is, so let's say you go in and you pick up a clean out kit at J. Crew, you send back all your stuff. Instead of giving you all the money on ThredUp, so, hey, Mike, you've earned $50, we've sold your items, we give it to you in credit to J. Crew. So we really reward the brand for educating you and driving that conversion and take back opportunity. And so we're getting a lot of traction with brands around this.
Got it. Very interesting. Yeah, the credit issue is a really interesting way to get the brands directly inspired to participate. So brands or ThredUp can think about this with the environmental overlay as a co-benefit that people can mention if asked, or they can lead with that. Where are you seeing, whether in ThredUp's own decisions and its own website and its own marketing, and also the brands you're working with, how is this being characterized or not as an environmental play?
Well, it's definitely part of the story. So I think we definitely talk about, on every product page that exists on ThredUp, we talk about the water savings, the carbon savings, electricity savings of shopping secondhand. We do a lot of education around just in all of your clothing habits, how to be a smarter consumer of the planet's resources. I mean, little things like, washing your clothes in cold water. makes a huge difference, right? These are like very small things. So we're big advocates in trying to educate consumers on making smart choices. Having said that, we lead with value, right? Because I think at the end of the day, we want customers to think about ThredUp as an incredibly great place to shop for great value. And so we often talk about the positioning as you have great brands at great prices in a sustainable way. And there's lots of opportunities out there where you can buy great brands on discount or on sale, or you can shop at TJ Maxx or any of those sorts of things. And we need to be aware that we compete with those guys. But ThredUp's the place that you can do that sustainably. And so that's our positioning. And then when we work with brands, we know it resonates with the brands because we see it in their annual reports. They do really talk about their take back programs, the amount of clothing they've been able to resell, their savings across, water, carbon, electricity. So we do think they take it seriously, but we also recognize that they're in the business of building a great brand, delighting a core customer with what's new and relevant. And so we don't have our head in the sand about the incentives to be a great brand and the incentives for us to be a great reseller.
Right. Well, we can't talk about complicated logistics without bringing in the concept of data analytics and AI, which is, every other sentence in some people's mouths. So can you tell us a little bit about how ThredUp is using or considering using these new tools, old tools or new tools with regard to data analytics?
I mean, Mike, we're all in on AI tooling in ways that I can't emphasize enough. I've been one of the guys around AI being underhyped. I do think it's a profound shift in everything that's going to exist for us. So about 18 months ago, we really began this journey of what does it look like to rebuild ThredUp in an AI first way. What's been so exciting, gratifying is to see our growth really come from building a better product experience on top of AI tooling. So when you have a challenge like us, which is every item is a snowflake, you've got this incredible long tail of product that requires technology in your distribution centers to put it online, merchandising, search. It's quite a lot. And so AI has really helped us build a better product for customers. So we started with search. So we spent 7 years building the search functionality in its form that we had on ThredUp as of January of 2024, about 7 years. In about 60 days, using a new open source AI technology along with some tooling that we did, 60 days we had something that was better. We spent years building a tagging infrastructure in our distribution center to tag clothing with all the attributes that a customer would search. In about 2 days, we were able to use AI to do that better. And so, and I could go on and on and on. And so we are really investing in the primary infrastructure around search and discoverability. And then we're really using it these days for merchandising. And so now, like, we can tell stories using generative AI that are so powerful in ways that we just couldn't do before because everything is unique and you do all this work and you send an email saying, merchandising all this stuff. And by the time the consumer clicked on the email, all the stuff was gone. And now you've got this back end system that can replenish at rates that we never would have been able to imagine. So anyway, it's very exciting for us. And I think our business is taking a leap forward because of it.
That's really interesting. I mean, I imagine it must also be useful in sorting both when it arrives in your warehouses, but also maybe even by the customer scanning it before it goes to help inform them, like, is this resellable or should you donate it? Or
we're prototyping that right now of allowing a customer to give us more information about what they're sending. And we've been actually prototyping it with voice, right? So you could just look at your closet and be like, I've got this, these brands, these colors, right? And what do you think, ThredUp? And we could, in a voice mode, be able to be like, oh, we'll take this, right? So we're thinking years ahead around how, because the technology that I just described is not quite ready for prime time in a truly conversational way. But boy, it's coming. And it might be 6 months, it might be 2 years, but we're going to be ready for the future.
I can also imagine you have a closet and you put in this section, you put the stuff that you're thinking about donating and you just run a camera over it and it starts recognizing all this.
Well, and we've added like ways that you could take a picture, on ThredUp right now, there's all sorts of ways for you to find items new that could be used. But we've also built an outfitting so that you could take a picture, for example, of a silk blouse and say, hey, what can I wear with this? And we will actually be able to tell you, hey, you could wear these things, some of which you might already have, but some of which we could also create outfits that are secondhand matchups. And so other ways that people can bring us into their life.
Yeah, really clever. So let's switch gears a little bit and talk about public policy. So that mentioned you have a public policy background, you went to Kennedy School here. What are the types of public policies that make your company's mission easier or harder? And what's changing?
I think what we're trying to do is figure out what the role of government is to create the right types of incentives for customers to do the right thing. And so what I often talk about is, government played a huge role in tax credits for solar adoption, right? Tax credits for EV adoption. One thing we've advocated for many years is I don't understand why there's tax on secondhand goods. If you want consumers to buy used goods, stop taxing used goods. That alone creates this mental shift of like, oh, it's cheaper to shop secondhand. And so that's just like a small example, but we're trying to advocate for policies where the government can do, relatively straightforward things that create the right sets of incentives. There's no reason that people, if you're selling secondhand goods, that you should pay, I believe, that you should pay income tax on that. Right? You're like doing a service. You're using your talents to resell things that have already been made. Why not reward you for doing good? So we're advocates for things like that. We also think there's a role so I think that's like the honey approach. I think the stick approach is extended producer responsibility, which is popular in Europe. And I think just holding accountable companies that, most of their products end up in landfills. And I think you're starting to see more technology arrive to allow you to see what's going in there. And I don't think we're that far from being able to truly count the impact of these fast fashion companies and what's ending up in landfills. So we're kind of a broad range of stuff. There's an organization called ACT, American Circular Textiles Association, and we're big supporters of them and policies they're trying to bring forth.
Got it. Yeah, I imagine to get politicians to charge an additional tax on items that have a short lifespan would be easier than trying to get yourselves tax-free, because one adds to the political coffers and the other one detracts.
Turns out that is easier. So, I don't know where we'll end on the tariff side, when the dust settles, but I do generally agree that we should figure out ways to tax some of these things that do have real negative externalities. And I think politicians generally agree on that.
Yeah. Interesting. Great. Well, let's turn to my final question, which is for those interested in working in the circular economy, whether it be fashion or other areas that I'm sure you've bumped into in your career, what do you suggest as resources for them to think about next, whether it be a podcast or websites or newsletters or what have you?
I just mentioned ACT. I think if you just Google ACT policy, ACT fashion, you'll find that organization. They have a lot of great resources on their website. I would put them at really the tip of the spear for this. So that's a great one. Rachel Kibbe's the CEO. So I think following Rachel on LinkedIn or Twitter, right, I think will put you really in a position to see what's new. The other one is I'm a pretty regular reader of Sourcing Journal, which I think does a great job of it is often the one talking about what's changing in resale, what's changing in the circular economy. And then the other one is there's a gentleman who's at Tufts, Ken Pucker, who I recommend people read and follow because he's a prolific creator of content. And I think Ken's really sharp. And then I would just encourage people that there are lots of places to play in this supply chain, right? And you can work at the brand side. You can work UPS has a team working on, solutions like this. McKinsey has a team working on solutions like this. And so sometimes when I talk to students, I think they get too focused on being on the consumer side. Like, oh, I want to work for a company that exists in the circular economy. You talked about recycling. Like there's companies doing really interesting work in the recycling world. So people broadening their perspective and thinking about all the activities that happen in this economy. There's lots of businesses out there.
Great. Well, James, it's been a real pleasure. Thank you so much for spending time of your busy day of talking to us here at Climate Rising.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate the work you guys are doing.
That was my conversation with James Reinhart, CEO of ThredUp. Climate Rising is produced by Sophie Wong. Craig McDonald is our audio engineer, and I'm your host, Mike Toffel. Video production by The Puglomerate. Thanks for joining us.